Hello, welcome to Writing for Scientists. My name is Joe, and today I'm going to talk about one of the most common genres in academic writing, but also one of the trickiest, and that is an abstract. And I'm going to focus specifically on an abstract for a presentation, which might be different from some other types of abstracts, and we'll talk about that in a second. And the writing idea that is going to help us write a good abstract, hopefully, is this idea of the researcher as actor. So if you're curious about what I mean by that, stay tuned and I will tell you more. The first really important concept is that there's no one-size-fits-all abstract. Right? Every different purpose, every different event, every different audience is going to require a slightly different kind of abstract. If you look online for tips on how to write an abstract, you'll get a lot of generic advice, which doesn't often tell you all the different possibilities and different sort of mini genres that exist within the genre of abstracts. So one big distinction that's really helpful is to see the difference between a paper abstract and a presentation abstract. And most of the advice that you'll see online is more geared toward paper abstracts. So that's why I'm focusing today a bit more on a presentation abstract. It's a bit more unique. So what's the difference? Well, a paper abstract accompanies a published paper, usually in an academic journal, right? It's often meant for a narrower, more insider audience. So perhaps researchers in your field, and people who are interested in the particular type of research that you're doing and maybe know quite a bit about it already. They often describe a finished study. The researcher did something and publishes it. It's finished. They say, here's my conclusions, here's my results, and yeah, I'm sort of done with it. Here you go. So in that sense, there's a little bit more distance maybe between the researcher and their audience, the people reading this. Paper abstracts often follow a very strict IMRAD structure, and I'm sure you know what that is at this point. Introduction, methods, results, discussion, right? And often in a paper abstract, they're even separated into different paragraphs. So the structure is quite strict. And this is the sort of advice that you will see if you go online and look for paper abstract tips. A presentation abstract, what I mean is if you are going to present your research at a conference, maybe, that would be the most obvious kind of presentation. But also when you're still in school, you're often asked to give presentations a lot of the time to your classmates, to your teacher, sometimes maybe to a larger body at the university. And so your audience might be a bit broader. They might include people that are not in your field, might not know exactly the specific thing that you're working on, and might need to be brought in with a little bit more context. A presentation is an event. It's something that happens in front of people, in front of a live audience, or in front of a Zoom audience these days during the pandemic. So that means that there's less distance between the presenter or the author and their audience. The presenter needs to give their audience something that's interesting, something that's exciting, and they need to perform, right, for the audience. So that's something that's important to consider. So because of all these differences between the purpose and the audience, between a paper and a presentation, we might need to think about a different structure, maybe a slightly different style for a presentation abstract than we would for a paper abstract. If you watched my video on cover letters, you remember that I said a cover letter is an argument. Well, an abstract is also an argument. What are you arguing in an abstract? Number one, my research is interesting and important, and I can show you why. It would be nice if we could just show our data, our raw data, and everybody would just be impressed and think, wow, this is amazing, this is so meaningful and powerful. But we know that that's not true, right? We need to interpret the data, we need to connect it to things that our audience can understand and be interested in. And so if we're talking about a slightly broader audience, maybe people who are outside your field, maybe even people who aren't scientists, then you're going to have to prove it. Prove that your research is interesting and important and show them why. I'm aware of how my research fits into the larger picture, what its potential is, what its limitations are. So again, a good abstract gives enough context for me to see how the research connects to previous research, how it connects to the next steps that need to be taken in the field. Okay? And so, yeah, I'm arguing that. I'm showing that that's the case in the abstract. And then if we're talking about a presentation abstract, don't forget that you're also showing your audience, your potential audience, that you designed the presentation so that it will be enjoyable and so that it will be educational, right? So you should give your audience a sense of what will happen when they come to the presentation and what they can expect to get out of it. One thing that I always tell students is an abstract should not be too abstract. We have these two words in English. One is a noun, right? An abstract, which is the genre of writing that we're talking about. And then we have an adjective, right? Abstract. And here's the Macmillan Dictionary definition of abstract as an adjective. Abstract ideas exist as thoughts in the mind and are not related to physical objects or real events and actions. And I think that definition is useful to juxtapose against the idea of a presentation abstract, because research involves real actions. You're a researcher, you did things, you did the research, and a presentation is a real event. You're going to stand up in front of people, an audience, and speak to them. So remember that when you write, and use language that shows your awareness of this, of yourself as an actor. And here's where the writing idea comes in. You need to show that you have done things, will do things, and make that clear in your abstract. All right, I'm going to show you two versions of a similar abstract. And here's the first one. I'm going to read it out loud to you, and as I read, sort of think about how it feels to read this. What are your impressions? Okay, and what do you get out of this? Again, imagine that you are a potential audience for this presentation. Would you like to go to it? Okay. A new direction in cancer research. This presentation will focus on pediatric oncology. For centuries, mankind has been struggling to find a cure for cancer. Previous research has shown that traditional methods are not adequate, and that personalized oncology has a higher effectiveness against neuroblastoma and rhabdomyosarcoma. In order to implement personalized oncology, a vast amount of data gained from detailed molecular characterizations and various bioinformatics analyses must be evaluated. In silico platforms for analyzing the mutations of proteins may be of assistance. Furthermore, it has been shown that computer modeling can be robust and user-friendly. However, there are many problems which must be dealt with before they can be widely used. It is worthwhile to consider several possible methods for overcoming difficulties with the platform. The purpose of the presentation is to show how the developed program can facilitate treatment and to increase knowledge about this important field. So, what do you think? Well, it has a lot of big, nice academic words. We have, all these nice words that we learned in English class, like furthermore and however. We have a lot of technical terms, neuroblastoma, rhabdomyosarcoma. So, to you, maybe it sounds like a pretty good abstract. But to me, It sounds kind of flat. It sounds kind of boring. I don't think I would really want to go to this abstract, to this presentation rather. I don't really get a very good sense of, what's going to happen. What am I going to learn from this presentation? And the weirdest thing is, I feel like I don't even know who is doing anything. I don't see anybody doing anything in this abstract. Where's the researchers, right? So this is the question that I have. So let's talk about some of the problems with this abstract as I see it. The beginning of the abstract is weak, okay? And so I'm going to show you a few reasons why I think that's the case. This is the second sentence in the abstract, and for centuries, mankind has been struggling to find a cure for cancer. Okay, it sounds very dramatic. It sounds like the beginning of a movie trailer, maybe, right? It reminds me of the Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns is going to block the sun. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a good episode. Anyway, so yeah, I'll try my best Mr. Burns voice. Since the beginning of time, man has yearned to destroy the sun. I will do the next best thing. Okay, well, maybe it's not so great an impression. Anyway, hopefully you get the same feeling that I do. This opening is way too broad, too big. Even if I'm not a scientist, then I don't need such a enormous context, enormous background for this abstract to understand why it's important. It's like if somebody said, "So how was your day?" and you said, "Well, it all began when I was born in 1979." Okay, we don't want to hear the whole story of mankind or your whole life story, right? So remember that when you're starting your abstract. You don't need to back up quite that much. And here are some other things that I think are sort of bad about the beginning of this abstract. I see a lot of times with beginning writers and students this kind of opening. This presentation will focus on pediatric oncology. Or this presentation is about, or this presentation deals with, something like that. To me, these sentences are sort of a wasted opportunity because you're just stating the topic without saying what's going to happen, or what you are going to deal with the topic, what specifically your question is. And the other thing is it's sort of pointless because in your title, you probably already have some keywords that let me know the subject and the topic of your presentation. So you don't need to repeat it again in the first line. So I'm going to call this sort of a boring beginning because it's sort of flat, it's static, it doesn't go anywhere, right? The other problem that you can have is to blast your reader with a lot of huge technical terms right at the beginning without giving them enough context to understand what these things are and why they're important. Now, obviously, you do need to use technical language in an abstract and in academic writing. As scientists, you do need to sometimes use very specific technical vocabulary, but you don't want to use tons of it right at the beginning, like I said, without giving enough background and enough context. So this is sort of a bewildering opening. And somebody who is not in your field might be totally lost, right? And they won't see instantly what the point of your research is. The bigger problem with the abstract that I read to you is what I call the case of the missing researchers, and I already mentioned this. Look at these sentences here. Analyses must be evaluated. Problems which must be dealt with. In silico platforms for analyzing the mutations of proteins may be of assistance. It is worthwhile to consider several possible methods. What's the issue with this language? Well, one thing is overusing the passive voice. So if you look at these first two sentences, they use the passive voice. But we might ask, and we should ask, who is doing these things. Of course, when we use the passive voice, we don't have to say who is doing the action, but that could be a real problem, and it could be really misleading as well. So analyses must be evaluated, problems which must be dealt with. Who is dealing with the problems? Who is evaluating the analyses? Well, in some cases, it might be previous researchers. In some cases, it might be you. You're the one who has to deal with these problems. You're the one who is evaluating these analyses. And so by using the passive voice in these cases, you are taking yourself out of the situation, right? And you're denying your agency in your own research. So that's kind of weird. And the other thing that's going on here is we're wording research actions as sort of universal facts, right? So it is worthwhile to consider several possible methods. Who decided that it's worthwhile? How did we come to that understanding? And why is that important? All these things that are actually open questions are stated as if they're just automatically established facts or truths, right? And again, that's short-circuiting the process. It's sort of skipping ahead and avoiding the truth, which is that these things are still up for debate. There's still a question about these. And in fact, in my presentation, I'm going to talk about that and take you through some of that process. So it's skipping ahead to the conclusions when, in fact, you're describing a process, right? And that's a problem. Okay, here is a rewrite of that same abstract. I'm going to read this out loud to you again. And again, just listen and see what you think. OncoTest, a new web-based in silico support tool for personalized oncology. Despite recent advances in pediatric cancer treatment, the success rate against some malignancies, such as neuroblastoma, remains low. Frustration over the failure of traditional treatment regimens has led to a new approach called personalized oncology, which rejects the old one-size-fits-all paradigm and tries to find the right care for the right child at the right time. For personalized oncology to work well, doctors must find the most suitable therapy for a patient within a very short time, which means they have to quickly evaluate a vast amount of data gained from detailed molecular characterizations and various bioinformatics analyses. In this presentation, I will introduce a novel method for managing this data, which my team and I have been working on. We have developed an in silico platform called OncoTest, which analyzes the mutations of proteins involved in tumor growth, tries to predict the effects of the mutations, and suggests the most promising compound to treat the disease. The program is still in its beta phase, but early tests with sample data have been promising. We plan to release the platform as a web-based tool within the next year. I will show how OncoTest works, discuss some of the problems we have faced in development, and explain some of the questions we still need to answer before this tool is ready to join the fight against cancer. Okay, I don't know about you, but I feel this is an improvement. I have a much better sense of what I'm going to experience when I go to this presentation, and I have a much better sense of what this research means, why it's important. Even if I'm not a medical researcher or an oncologist, I can understand what's going on here because I get enough information, I get enough context. So what concepts did I use to sort of reconstruct this abstract? In the first part of the abstract, to continue this metaphor of the researcher as actor, I like to call it setting the stage. And this has sort of two parts. In the first sentence, probably, you need to show that there's a problem, or show that there's a question, or show that there's an issue, right? And so immediately when we hear about the success rate against various cancers, immediately, even if I'm not a scientist, I know exactly why that's a problem. And I feel that something needs to be done. So then I move to the second part, which is we may have a solution, but more work needs to be done. So I want to create this sense that, okay, here's a promising angle, but we still need to do more research to find out about it. Okay, so I'm setting the stage for my research and my activity, right? My research actions. And so that's going to be the second part of my abstract. Again, we can break this down into sort of two sections. In the first section, I'm going to show what I've been doing, or my team and I, what we've been doing to sort of fill this, this gap, this problem in the research. Okay? And at the same time, actually, I'm saying if you come to my presentation, you'll find out more. Okay? In this presentation, I will introduce, blah, blah, blah. I will show, I will discuss, I will explain. So I'm using the first person, I'm using I or we when I'm talking about my team, and I'm using active verbs to say what will happen if you come to my presentation. Okay, so I'm giving the audience a good sense of that. If we go back to the rewritten abstract, one thing that I think is really helpful and that I always do when I'm sort of reviewing my own abstracts is I divide the abstract into two parts based on what I was just telling you, sort of which part is setting the stage and which part am I describing my activity as a researcher and as a, in this case, as a presenter. And you'll see I did that here. I sort of color-coded the two parts. Setting the stage is in pink, and my activity is in blue. And you can see that about half of the abstract is my actions, right? And the actions of the audience when they come to see my presentation. What's going to happen? Actually, I would say in this abstract, the setting the stage section is probably a bit bigger than I would normally want it to be. So at the very least, the second half of the presentation is going to be and should be my activity as a researcher. But it could be more, and really, I would say in some cases I could get away with a little bit less explanation, a little bit less background. In this case, the research being done is kind of specific, and it might take a little bit more, I think, to let the audience know why it's important and give the context. But what you definitely don't want is 90% of your abstract is pink, right? Setting the stage, giving background information, saying what has already happened, and maybe at the very end, you get one line. In the presentation, I will do this. That's too late. That's too little, and it will give the impression that either that nothing much interesting is going to happen in the presentation, or maybe worse, you haven't really planned very well what's going to happen in the presentation. And I actually think this is true just as much for paper abstracts as for presentation abstracts, that really the majority of the abstract should be describing your research. But that's for another time to talk about. There's an elephant in the room. There's a question that we haven't addressed, because in the presentation so far, my presentation, I've sort of suggested a style and a active style, a way of writing your abstract that is most successful if you can use the first person, right, and use active verbs. But some of you may be wondering, can I do that? Is that allowed? Because I've heard from many students that are told by professors or told by academic journals even, you must never use I in academic writing. And the reason I think that they are often given when they are told this is that it's because as scientists we need to be objective. We need to make sure that our own biases, our own opinions are not influencing our research. But I think it's really important to see that that's a sort of metaphorical way of thinking about language. And just because you use the first person in your writing doesn't necessarily mean that you are giving your random biased opinion. Okay, those are two different things. So it's important to realize that rule that you might hear isn't necessarily a rule. So we should think through that a little bit. The other important thing to think about is that it's a cultural issue and a linguistic issue as well. So it may be that in certain cultures, there's more of a reluctance to use I or more of a prohibition against using I. So, of course, I respect that and I understand that. But I'm showing you how to write an abstract in English, so let's focus on what's happening in English. Anyway, the answer is yes, as you might have guessed. I think you can use I in academic writing. Why? Let's think through this. Because it makes sense to use I when you're describing decisions you've made and actions you've done or will do as a researcher and a presenter, right? Again, the researcher as actor. You have participated in this research, you've done things, you've made decisions. There's really no reason to not use I. If you're writing as a group, of course, then use we, right? I or we, essentially it's the same thing. I personally don't use we unless it really is we, a group of people who worked on something together. Otherwise, I use I, right? Essentially, they're both the first person there. This idea that avoiding using I somehow shows that you are more objective, it just doesn't really make sense, actually. Avoiding I, using passive voices in these cases, does not magically make your research objective. In fact, the irony is that it might be really misleading, right? You might be suggesting, if you say, things were done and decisions were made, you're sort of suggesting with that passive language that these things just happened. I don't know, God or the universe made these decisions or did this research, right? And that's problematic, right? That's almost going against the idea that we want to have, right? That human beings have done this objective research. The other reason is that linguistic, because essentially in English we have a very strict sense of syntax. We have a strict sense of where the subject and the verb and the object should go in the sentence. Of course, we can play around with that a little bit, but it's so much easier and so much nicer to construct sentences in the active voice in English, right? And when we try to avoid that, then we may create these circuitous, annoyingly long and complicated sentences. So if we don't need to do that, I think we shouldn't. And so I encourage you to use I, but of course you need to check with your professor, with the publisher, right? Obviously, if they tell you that you can't use I, then you can't use I, and you're going to have to find a way around it. But especially for a presentation abstract, I find that kind of weird. So that's something that you can debate with your teachers, maybe. I'll show you sort of a last tip that I like to do when I'm finished with my abstract and ready to turn it in. Another thing that can be helpful is to highlight only the verbs. And you can even read out the list of verbs as a sort of abstract within your abstract. And when you do that, you can sometimes get a feeling, right? Does this abstract give the sense of an active, engaged researcher trying to actively engage their audience? Or does it sound kind of flat, boring, static, and sort of weak. So I'm going to read out I highlighted the verbs here in yellow, and I'm going to read them out, only the verbs, and sort of you can get a sense for the overall sort of feeling of my abstract. Remains, has led, rejects, tries to find, to work, must find, have to, evaluate, will introduce, have been working on, have developed, analyzes, tries, suggests, is, have been, plan, will show, discuss, explain, need, join. Okay. So, hopefully you can see the variety of my verbs. I'm using lots of different types of verbs. I don't know about you, but when I read that, I get a feeling of, I don't know, somebody kind of moving around, doing things, things being done, things being accomplished. I'm not going to go back and read the other example abstract, the verbs from those, but you can try and do that and see if you can tell the difference. Okay. So thanks for listening. If you're working on an abstract or any type of text and you want some advice, come visit us at the Writing Lab. You can make an appointment with me or my colleague Abby, and we will take a look at your text and see if we can help you think about ways of making it better. Okay, so thanks, and see you next time on Writing for Scientists.